Trigger warning. In this episode of Sorry for Trauma Dumping, we will discuss sensitive topics including abortions, alcoholism, childhood sexual abuse, death, domestic violence, drug use, guns, kidnapping, miscarriages, overdosing, psych ward, rape, seizures, self-harm, suicide attempts, suicide, vomit, and other sensitive topics.
Hello and welcome to Sorry for Trauma Dumping. I'm your host, Alex, and today I'm joined with a special guest. Her name is Adri. Hello.
Hi.
It's so nice to meet you.
It's so nice to meet you too. I'm very excited.
Oh, I'm excited too. We just found out that we actually live in the same state. I didn't even realize.
Yeah, it's crazy how that works.
Yes, and we're not even that far away from each other either, so I absolutely love that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we had to go Iowa fam.
Yup, for sure.
Alrighty, so I'm gonna go ahead and pass it to you, and you can go ahead and share whatever you would like to share today.
Yeah, so I'm kind of gonna just share like little tidbits because my entire life has kind of been one big traumatic event. But it all really started out, my dad was an alcoholic, and I say was because he is now passed. But he was an alcoholic. He was very abusive towards my mom throughout her pregnancy with me, and then tried to take me when I was about a week old and drive to my grandmother's house while he was absolutely plastered. So he ended up throwing my mom down the stairs, and the cops were called. It was a whole thing. So my mom and we spent my first few years living with my grandmother, my mom's mom, my Nana, and my great grandma as well. They both helped my mom a lot to take care of me because I was a very medically complex child. I was born late, not even early or anything, but I came out and wouldn't cry for about the first 2 hours. They struggled really, really hard to get me to breathe, and that just has led to a lot of lifelong issues, I guess. I was also a very colicky baby, which was like a premonition to my GI issues that I have now. But then when I was about 4, my parents got back together for a little bit, and my brother was born. He is about 4 years younger than me. And then we moved from one town to about halfway across the state a week before first grade started. So kindergarten was pretty normal for me. Like, it was definitely weird because I didn't have a dad in the picture, but it wasn't as weird because I never had really had a dad in the picture. So it just was normal for me. And then when we moved, it was very, very difficult. I struggle a lot with change. I am very neurodivergent. I am autistic and ADHD. And so I struggled a lot with that transition. I started lashing out really bad. And that led to my mom lashing back out at me. And we ended up going through quite a few years of very trying times of I would hit her, she would hit me. It just kind of turned into this whole thing. And so that was not great. But then it was around age 7, I had my first suicide attempt.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, I didn't really know that I wanted to die, but I knew I did not want to keep living the way that I was living. I ended up taking like an entire bottle of ibuprofen and was like, I'm just gonna see how it goes. You know, like if I don't make it through this. If I don't wake up in the morning, it's not the end of the world type thing.
That's a lot for a 7-year-old.
Yeah. So my mom made me throw up. She like found me puking in my bathroom and she made me throw up. But the issue with that was she did not get me any mental health help throughout any of my suicide attempts until I was 19 is when I first got actual legitimate help inpatient for my mental health. But I have had over 26 suicide attempts throughout my life. Clearly none of them worked. I'm still here. I am thriving now, but it was definitely a very trying time for quite a few years. My dad was very abusive towards me growing up. And then right after my first suicide attempt, that happened right after I turned 7. And then the Easter after I turned 7, my cousin began sexually abusing me. And that went on for 4 years. And so it's considered child-on-child sexual assault because she was only 2 years older than me. No prosecution ever happened. I've not gotten any justice from the situation. And that's been very, very frustrating. When I brought it online I don't know what exactly I was hoping for when I brought it online, just like for her to maybe apologize kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because we've talked in the past years and I've brought it up and she's like, that never happened. That never happened. That never happened. Or then the last time we talked, she admitted to it happening and said that she did not care that it left me with lifelong trauma. She did not care that she did it. She was proud of herself, essentially. Like, it was a very fucked up situation, to be quite frank with you.
Yeah.
And so...
was that learned behavior? Like, was she also sexually abused?
I honestly don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
She never had given a reasoning behind why she did it.
Okay.
She just said, it was more of like a power dynamic type thing. Okay. Because I was like the favorite grandchild. Okay. And so it was definitely very difficult. And when I brought it online, nobody believed me. And that was very, very frustrating. My mom did not know about it until she found it on her TikTok. And then she did not believe me for quite a few years. And so that went on until I was 11. In that time frame, I started therapy for my parents' divorce. But that was about the extent of how my therapy went, was just talking about my parents.
Like, they never wanted to dive into anything else? Like, if you'd bring it up, they would just be like, well, we're not here for that. We're here for your parents.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Exactly. And so that was always very, very frustrating because I never felt heard. Yeah. And I finally, now that I have a voice, I finally do feel heard. Mm-hmm. But when I started that therapy, my therapist recognized that I was suicidal, and had actually recommended that I start a little notebook and with all my reasons that I wanted to stay alive. And so I called it my little reasons to stick around notebook. And I had well over probably 200 reasons in that book over the over the 5 years that I had that notebook. Mm-hmm. And then when I was 15, my mom found it and threw it out. Oh. And she's like, you don't need this. You just have it all in your head. Like, you're fine, basically. And it was very, very frustrating. I always say that I lost the notebook, but it wasn't that. She threw it away. And so then as the years went by, I had a lot of medical trauma. I had a knee surgery in 2016 that they prescribed me hydrocodone for 6 months following. But prior to that, I had started abusing drugs when I was 12. I found my brother's stash of Adderall and Xanax that he took. And, well, he didn't actually take the medicine. That's why he had a stash of them built up.
Right.
Because he would hide them in his room so that mom wouldn't find them in the trash. I remember distinctly the first time that I ever took my first handful of pills. I felt a sigh, like a sense of relief. But it wasn't the right kind of relief. It was a relief because I was able to escape for a few hours from everything going on. I had just come off of the sexual assault or the sexual abuse a year prior, and I was really, really struggling mentally. I was self-harming multiple different ways. I was doing a lot of things that I shouldn't have been doing at that age. I grew up way too fast, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, so for about 2 years prior to me abusing all of the prescription drugs, nope, I said that wrong. About 2 years prior to my hydrocodone beginning, I had been abusing the Adderall, the Xanax, and then would find any other pills lying around the house that I could, whether it be ibuprofen or Tylenol or Benadryl or whatever I could do to just not feel something. And
I can get that. I can understand that.
It was very, very difficult those 2 years that I didn't have, don't know how I want to word this. I didn't have like a proper escape. I started, when I abused the hydrocodone, that began, I found a few hobbies because I was bored out of my surgery. And then about a year later, I ended up having a major knee surgery with the same doctor. The year prior was just a knee scope. And then this next one was a major knee surgery called the tibial tubercle transfer. And so they sliced off my tibial tubercle, moved it over to the center of my knee, and screwed it in. It's the craziest thing. You would never think that that's like something that they could do. Mm-hmm. But it all stems because I have this disease called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Okay. And I was diagnosed around the time of my knee surgery. They had been thinking that I had it for quite a few years prior, but they couldn't find a doctor to properly diagnose it because it was very, very rare at the time.
Okay.
And now that the years have gone on, it's become a lot more common to get diagnosed with it, which is great for the people that genuinely have it, but doctors are now overdiagnosing it, prescribing pain meds to the wrong people, and it just turns into this whole thing.
I feel like I've heard about it a lot these last like 6 months on TikTok.
Yes.
That's been like something really big along with POTS. My daughter was just recently diagnosed with POTS. So I know sometimes don't those go hand in hand?
Yes, they do. Ehlers-Danlos is technically classified as like the main disease.
Okay.
Where POTS and gastroparesis, paralyzation of the stomach, and like dysautonomia in general. So I was diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos right around the time that I had my knee surgery officially. I had been unofficially diagnosed for about 6 years prior to that, where they just couldn't find a doctor to properly diagnose me because nobody would touch it at the time. And that has led to, I'm diagnosed with POTS. I am diagnosed with gastroparesis, sick sinus syndrome, as well as some neurological issues. I have unexplained seizures. And so it's been quite quite interesting the last few years. So after being diagnosed, it explained a lot of questions that I had about my health. It explained a lot of my history with my stomach issues. Because with Ehlers-Danlos, there's all of the comorbid diseases like I described, and gastroparesis has definitely been one of my biggest ones that I've struggled with, outside of just Ehlers-Danlos in general with all my joint issues. And gastroparesis, again, is the paralyzation of the stomach. And so my stomach is not digesting things like it should. And so it just sits in there for hours and hours and hours when normally it would be digested within like 2 hours, I think. But I can eat something at 5 a.m. and then end up puking at like 9 or 10 p.m. and it still was undigested food type thing. And
That's
so
crazy.
It's very, very frustrating. I thankfully have never had to have a feeding tube because within 24 hours, my food does process. I just have to eat very small, infrequent meals. But that's definitely been a big struggle for me the last few years, around almost the last 8 years now, I guess. But that was definitely a very hard realization to come to when I realized that my body was not working properly. And I blamed myself a lot for these issues that I was having, which I know now it's not my fault. It's quite literally a genetic disorder. And so I just have struggled a lot. I've been in a lot of therapy about these things. But going on from my knee surgery, I started abusing drugs really, really heavily, like a year prior to that major knee surgery. It started when I was 12, 13-ish, but then got really, really bad in 2016, got even worse in 2017, when I was 15, and I ended up meeting a guy that was not good for me. And we did a lot of drugs together. I don't know what happened to him, honestly. We kind of like parted ways a few years later when I met my ex-boyfriend, Shaheen. And we met when I was 17, which was, I believe, right around the time that COVID started, was right when I was around 17. I get mixed up with years, ages, all that kind of stuff sometimes.
Same,
but
it's okay.
We met basically just my junior year of high school. I was in my school's continuing education program, I guess you would call it. And he was in one of the modules, and I was in a different module. And he had been friends, he was homeschooled, and he had been friends with one of my good friends. And since he was homeschooled, he was able to open enroll into this continuing education program. And I thought it was meant to be. I really did.
At 17, you think every, you know what I mean? It's true love.
Yeah, and I had been messing around with girls for a few years prior to that. Never had really had an interest in guys ever. I'm definitely queer through and through, but it was a very new experience when I met Shaheen. And it was very, very difficult because we used together. We used drugs very, very heavily together. And the guy that I had met when I was 15, it was not romantic in any real sense of the word. It was, we were using each other to get more substances.
Yeah.
And when I met Shaheen, it was kind of romantic, and I was like, oh, this is perfect. And then he and I, right in February of my senior year, so about a year after we met, we ended up taking a break for a couple of months. In that time, my father committed suicide, and then he overdosed less than a month later and ultimately passed away from that.
Oh, no.
And I didn't get to go to his service either because it was, one, COVID times, two, his family hated my guts because of the way that we had met, the way that we used together, all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And now, thankfully, we're on better terms. We haven't spoken in quite a few years, but they are comfortable with me sharing his story, you know, because it was my story too. Right. And it was definitely a very rough time grieving the loss of two people, either of which at the time of their death I was speaking to. And my dad and I had not spoken in over 3 years prior to his suicide. And he had begun using drugs. He was in recovery from his alcoholism for quite some time, but he was still drinking. And that kind of brings me back to 7th grade in a way, because when I was in 7th grade, New Year's Eve, I found my dad passed out drunk, choking on his vomit. And I had to roll this 280-pound man. I was 90 pounds at the time. I was anorexic. I had to roll him on his side, sweep his throat. And it was the most devastating thing that I had ever had to experience.
Oh, I bet. That's traumatizing even just for a full-grown adult, let alone a child.
Yes.
And being your father. It's not like it was just like some rando. Like, this is your dad. So, like, yes, I get it.
Yeah, and I couldn't go to anybody about it. That was the hardest part, is he was in recovery, and so I felt like if I went to somebody, I would be ruining his image. And if I ruined his image, the abuse would get worse.
Yeah.
And so it was definitely a very, very rough time, those handful of months following that. My dad and his ex-wife ended up getting a divorce shortly after that. And I truly believe it's because I tried going to her about what was going on. And I think she saw right through his lies. It's all really speculation at this point, but that's what my assumption is, that happened. But it really is just speculation that all happened. And so then when I turned 18, it was quite literally, he killed himself 16 days after I turned 18. And it was just, and then Jaheen died exactly a month after I turned 18. So it was a very, very trying time. With COVID, we couldn't have visits with my dad.
Yep.
And so I had not seen him in person in a year. But I had not spoken to him in almost 3 years. The only time we would see each other within those 2 years before COVID was when we would do exchanges with my brother, because I refused to speak to him. And he would try to talk to me, and I'd be like, nope, fuck off. Like, I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to look at you. You have hurt me in undescribable ways. And so that was definitely very, very difficult to process. Having been estranged from him, I felt like it was my fault when he died. And I also felt like it was my fault when Jaheen died, because he got really, really bad after we broke up. And it just was all very difficult. We had broken up because he couldn't go to prom with me. because of COVID, and he was homeschooled. So he technically went to a different school.
Yeah.
And so that was very, very rough. But then the night before my 18th birthday, so prior to those two deaths, I had met a guy. His name I thought was Bryce. But that we'll get into that because that's a whole time. So he advertised that his name was Bryce. We met on my college's like website, like Instagram page for incoming freshmen, and was basically just looking for people to groom at that point. I was just about to turn 18, so it's not technically classified as grooming, but that's what he was doing.
Yeah.
And he introduced me to the wonderful world of very hard drugs. Not actually a wonderful world. So the night before I turned 18, I drove up to my college town and we did a lot of cocaine. I unknowingly got pregnant that night for the first time. I had always been very, very careful prior to that. I was on birth control, but then found out that when one, you gain weight, number two, when you do a lot of drugs, those cancel out birth control. And I had not gotten an upped dosage of my birth control for my weight gain. I was just kind of sticking with what I had known. And so that was very, very rough. Bryce and I stayed in contact throughout the summer while I was in a relationship with another girl. And
were you pregnant at the time still?
I was, yes.
Okay.
I did not know. Yeah. I did not know that I was pregnant. It was technically classified as a cryptic pregnancy, but I did find out around 16 weeks because I had a blood test done. But then the week before my freshman year of college started, I went out on the party day, is what they called it. And I ran into Bryce again. And I had gone out with other friends, and I went to this one specific frat's satellite house. And he was like, "You got $10?" And I was like, "What for?" "I just need to pee." And because he was in the bathroom, and I was like, "Can I please use the restroom?" And he was like, "You got $10?" And I'm like, "What for?" And he's like, "You want another line?" And I was like, I'm not going to turn that down because I always had a really, really hard time with turning things down when they are very blatantly presented to me. And I had like $50 cash on me that day because I was buying alcohol from all these random people. I had only begun drinking about a year prior to that, but that was the day, August 18th of 2021 was the day that it got bad. My drug use had been very intermittent after Jaheen died. My alcohol use was here and there, and then my weed use was also here and there. But then August 18th is when everything came crashing down. And for about a year after that, I was using very, very, very heavily. Like I am talking probably 2 grams of Coke every other day.
Oh my God.
And I overdosed 4 times throughout that couple of months after August. So between August and November, I overdosed 4 times. And after my first overdose, they had done a tox screen on me. They ran a whole bunch of labs and in the ER and discovered that I was pregnant. And that was very scary for me because I just wanted to keep using. That is all I wanted to do at that time in my life. I did not want to feel anything because I still felt like my father and Joaquin's death were my fault.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just did not want to feel a single fucking thing. And that was my easiest way of getting out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it completely and totally ruined my life because I ended up going to Planned Parenthood up in my college town for all of my care. And they did an ultrasound and discovered that my baby had no nasal bone, which is a marker for trisomy, specifically trisomy 18, which I believe is Edwards syndrome, if I'm remembering correctly.
Okay.
It's typically not compatible with life. And that was before Roe v. Wade was overturned.
Yep.
And so I had options, thankfully. I had been using my entire pregnancy. One form or another I had been using. And so I did not feel like it was right to bring this baby into the world. Number one, if the baby was not compatible with life, I did not want to continue the pregnancy. Number two.
Yep.
And number three, Bryce would threaten my life if I would have continued that pregnancy. And so it was very, very rough. And so I had a DNC at about 16 weeks. And then I had a couple of pregnancies following that. Within about a 4-month span, I would get pregnant, have an abortion, get pregnant, have an abortion. And it was because I was constantly being raped by Bryce's friends. I was severely under the influence, and they would claim that I would give consent when I know for a fact that I would never give consent to that many men.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had said earlier, I was very strictly into women for a very long time unless a man could offer me something.
Yep.
And that's all my relationship with Bryce was he offered me drugs for free, typically, except for that one day on the party day. That was the only time I had ever paid for drugs in a very long time, because I paid with my body.
Yeah.
And so I would be raped by upwards of 5 men at a time. So gangbanged, basically. And it wrecked me. It really did. My last overdose that November, I was in a coma for 4 days following it because it was so severe. I had a grand mal seizure. And somehow on the internet somewhere, there's a video of me having a seizure on the bathroom floor. Because every single time, because we all used together, and every single time someone would overdose, they would take a video to essentially prove to the cops that they did everything that they could. You know, we tried to be safe about things, whatever. Like, we would have Narcan, we would use clean needles if we were using heroin or another substance that used a needle. And we had like pipes. We didn't use tinfoil when we were smoking shit. And it was just very much so they did everything in their power to prevent people dying. And then I almost died. And everything went to shit after that. Bryce had called an ambulance. And so he took me downstairs because he did not want the police in his apartment. And so when he took me downstairs, the ambulance picked me up. They immediately noticed I was still seizing. I had I think it was a 6-minute seizure. If I'm remembering correctly, it was a very, very long seizure. And
was Was that
I
brought on by the drug use, or
It was
was
brought
it
on
just
by
like
the
health in
overdose.
general?
The
Okay.
overdose, yeah. And so then when I got to the hospital up in my college town, they placed me into a medically induced coma after realizing how much swelling I had on my brain because I had been cut off from oxygen for so long.
Mm-hmm.
And Bryce left me during that time. He stayed with me throughout the 4 days that I was in the hospital. And then my last few days in recovery, at the hospital, he was there on and off, but I knew something was going on because he was not his normal self. I now know that he was using like crystal meth, which is one substance that we typically did not do. We would do it every now and then, but it was a very rare occurrence, and he had made it a very common occurrence in his life. And then he went to go get the car and never came back when I was released. And so I had to call.
Like it sounds like he kind of stayed around just to make sure you lived, and then he was like, okay, she's gonna live, I'm gonna bounce.
Yep, precisely. That's exactly what all of my therapists have said prior to this, like prior to now, is they've all said that, you know, it really seems like he was just covering his ass so that the hospital didn't like call the cops on him, basically.
Yeah.
And
maybe he felt some kind of guilt. Like, if she died, then he was going to blame him. Like, if you died, he's like, oh, I'm going to blame myself. But, oh, she's going to live. She's good. I don't need to be here.
Yeah, exactly. So it was definitely very, very rough. One of my good friends at the time, I texted and called her like 30 million times to have her come get me from the hospital. And my mom still to this day has no friggin' clue that any of that happened. She knows that I overdosed, but she does not know the extent of that overdose.
Right.
And so after that, I stuck because Bryce and I were no longer together. I no longer had free access to drugs. I dug into his past a little bit more. Found out Bryce was not his real name, but I could not figure out what his real name was. He was not actually a student at the university. He was 27, I think is what one of his friends had said. And he claimed that he was 23. And so those entire like 8 months of my life that I had known him were completely and totally a lie. And that was very, very difficult for me to come to terms with as well, because it's just like, it sounds so unbelievable. And so I would bring it up and people are like, that's fake. And I'm like, I can assure you it is not.
No, because that's actually really freaking common. I also grew up in a college town. That shit happened all the time. Because if they're local, they want to feel young and like hang out with the college kids and do what the college kids do, and don't want to admit that like they're getting older and like they have more responsibilities and stuff. So it's like, it's better if I change who I am and say I'm younger so that I can hang out with younger people and still live that party life.
Right. And it's just absolutely absurd to me how convincing he was. And all of his friends, all of our friends, thought that he was this 23-year-old named Bryce who was an ag major. And he was
not. So
he
wasn't even attending the school. He just would hang out on campus.
Yep.
That's insane.
Yep. He would go hang out in empty classrooms, so when I would check, it would look like he was in the buildings. He would also occasionally attend class with me, claiming that like we were in the same class type of thing. But ironically, it was only during the times, like it was after we would take attendance, before the class would end, he would just come in the middle of class for a little bit. And so I thought, oh, he's just a jagoff, like that doesn't want to do work and, you know, whatever. I was very naive.
That also tells me that the college needs better security.
Oh,
What?
100%. Well, like 5 kids have died at that college since my
Yep.
overdose. Likely, I'm assuming he was friends with them.
That's
Because they
really
all
sad.
died under similar circumstances to my overdose. And so it's very, very sad because I don't know if he's still out there doing this. I don't know where he is. I have no freaking clue of anything. And so I have not legally changed my name, but I have changed my name. One, to protect myself, and 2, so he can't find me on any social media, because my birth name is not on any of my social medias anymore. And it's definitely a very, very scary situation. There have been times where I've thought that I've seen him out and about down here in my hometown. And thankfully, it's never been like truly him. It's just been lookalikes to him. But I don't know if he's ever going to come out of the woodwork again. I don't know anything. I really don't.
That's scary. I get that fear. I get it.
And the other interesting thing was he had such a deep faked personality and identity that the police did not even register that the apartment that we were using in was under his name, because it was not under his legal name. It was under one of his friends' names. And he had his legal name, apparently, on another apartment. Because when I had told them that it's this Bryce dude, I don't know his last name, I don't know his legal name, like, I definitely don't think it's Bryce, they could not find him anywhere. They had security footage of him from the hospital. They tried finding him for months. I was in contact with the police for months, and nothing ever happened.
That's insane. Like, he sounds like a freaking psychopath.
He definitely was.
Oh my God.
I still to this day can't believe that he got away with all of it. I really can't. Because since he had gone downstairs when I had my overdose and my seizure, they did not know which apartment we were in. And so that was very, very rough. So about, I would say, December-ish of 2021 into January, I really was struggling with my mental health. I didn't really use too many drugs following Bryce's ghosting me, but was smoking weed and drinking very, very heavily. But I was a freshman in college. It was normalized. I was also in a sorority. And so it was very, very normalized to go out and party. Thirsty Thursday, Wine Wednesday, Tipsy Tuesday. It was every Mug Night Monday, whatever. It was whatever excuse I could get to drink, I would take it. And that was
that, because college towns are so predatory. That's how they make their money. Like, even in the college town I live at, like, you just know, like, especially as, like, freshmen, there's these certain bars to go to because they're not going to card you. And, and then there's other bars that once you are 21, they have specials every night of the week because they want people in their doors. That's how they make money.
Exactly.
So, I get it.
And most of the liquor stores up there did not card. Most of the time, if they would catch on to me drinking almost every single night. My cat's trying to open his door. I'm so sorry. But most of the time, if they would catch on that I was buying so much alcohol that they would essentially cut me off. Because of course I would have accounts with these liquor stores to get rewards and stuff. And so when they would look at my history and my receipt history, they'd be like, you're drinking too much. Like, you need to stop. And I had a fake ID, so like I thought it was all fine and dandy. And I didn't ever think I would get caught until I did, and had them call the cops on me one night because they're like, I came in absolutely plastered into the liquor store. This was February of 22. I came in absolutely plastered, and it was very, very rough. And they took my fake and were like, we're gonna let you go. Like, my college town's police system was very lackadaisy on a lot of things. That's why my drug use was never really criminalized. It was essentially just like a you have to get clean kind of thing. Like, we're not gonna fault you for using, and like you're in a bad headspace, you're fine. Like, I don't even think they called the cops when I was in the hospital after in my talk screen.
It's almost like they don't want, because you were a college student there, that they don't want these things to like, oh, well, there's so much drug use going on at this college. Because
Yep.
I know we're from the same state. So I know picking colleges, there are certain colleges that are known for certain things. So I know there was one that was Kegwood that everyone knew it was a party school.
Yep.
And that's just kind of what we called it. And like, that's what you anticipated by going there. But if you're going to a big name college, they don't want that. Everyone knows it's happening, but they don't want that to be known. That's what's going on there. So they're keeping a lot of stuff under the rug. And like, you know, we know it's happening, but we're not going to make files of it because that's going to look bad upon the school.
Well, and that even brings me back to that fall that I had been using very heavily, and I was trying to get into a sorority.
Mm-hmm.
And they actually deferred my initiation because they found out that I was using, and they did not want that image. Rightfully so. I completely understand why they did it. I wish they would have just kicked me out instead of deferring my initiation. But I believe they were going to send me to the dean if I continued to publicize it like I did. I wasn't like super public about it, but I was public about it within the sorority. I would chit chat and I'd like throw in, oh yeah, like I'm high as shit right now. And like, that kind of thing, because I semi-trusted the people in there, but it was also just a matter of I did not give a single fuck. And so then going back to February of 22, when I really, really hit my rock bottom for what I thought at least, I ended up coming home for spring break about a week early. After my ex-girlfriend and I broke up, we had been dating for a couple of months at that point, and I was like, I just can't handle it. I can't handle it. And so I ended up going back up to school for finals, but was home for about a week prior to spring break. And then my mom, she did not know that I was doing any substances, including nicotine. And she found my vape, and she was like, what's this? Like, why are you vaping? Like, you know, your dad used tobacco, like it's bad for you, whatever. And so I came clean to her about a couple of drugs that I would do or that I had done. Not the whole story.
Just more of like the safer, like everyone kind of does it drugs.
Exactly. Okay. And so she sent me to Narcotics Anonymous, which rightfully so, but like not in the context of what she knew I was doing. I was like, yes, these are just things that everyone does. But I had thought I hit my rock bottom. And so that's when I came clean to my mom about alcohol, weed, nicotine, whatever, but left out the hard drugs, left out the fact that I had been abusing my brother's prescription medications whenever I was home. And that was very difficult. And so I entered recovery for a little while. I struggled to stop smoking weed. I really, really struggled to stop smoking weed. And so I ended up getting clean that May. But that was only because right after spring break, I'd been working at a vet clinic in my hometown, and I almost adopted a dog from one of my coworkers. The adoption ended up falling through, but then I found an advertisement on the 1-year anniversary of my father's suicide for this dog named Willow in my grandfather's hometown in a very small town called Allerton, Missouri. And that was the most miraculous thing that has probably ever happened in my life. One of two things. The other thing I'll get into in a moment. But the advertisement showed that she was a Labrador Springer Spaniel mix. Then we get down to Trenton, Missouri, where she was at, and which is the neighboring town of Allerton. And she comes out. She has the smallest little legs I've ever seen on a Springer Spaniel Lab mix. Turns out she's half beagle. This girl is beagle through and through with her barking, her howling. It's insane. But I ended up writing a couple of speeches about her following her adoption when I went back up to my college town for school. And I was in a speech class at the time. And so they had us write a toast speech. And so I recorded it because I didn't want to present it in front of the class. I had a lot of anxiety and really struggled to publicly speak. This was just a required class that I absolutely had to take for my major. And so I was kind of half-assing it the way through. But this speech had absolutely changed my life. I ended up getting like the best speech in the class from it. And it was a toast to Willow, my dog. And I kind of had explained, my story a little bit. And it was a very, very touching moment. That speech is up somewhere on my TikTok. It's on YouTube somewhere too. But it was probably one of my most touching speeches that I've ever written. And I've written quite a few since then. Just a few like monologue type speeches. And so that was great. And then I entered recovery that May. I got clean off of all substances for about a month. And then I started smoking weed again, kept it under wraps for a few months until I fully relapsed following a breakup with my then girlfriend. She's a recurring character in my life. I won't name her for obvious reasons, but she has been a recurring character in my life for the last couple of years. And I finally have parted ways with her, thankfully. But that was a very tough breakup. It was my first very, very, very serious relationship. It was about a 6-month relationship, and I thought we were going to get married. Like, I truly thought we were going to get married. I thought I was going to get married to Bryce, but I had no freaking clue until I met this girl. And so when we broke up, I relapsed onto cocaine and alcohol and was mixing them very frequently. I would do a line, drink a beer, do a line, drink a beer, do 10 lines, drink like 2 beers, that kind of thing. And I really, really struggled for about 6 months and then had my final overdose. I say final because I'm never going back to that life again, and ended up in the hospital. My mom actually had to come up because at the time she had medical guardianship over me because she's like, I can't trust you after I entered NA and then relapsed, and she knew I relapsed. And I had actually been taking a medical leave from the university at the time because I could not handle everything going on mentally, as well as my drug use and classes all at the same time, because I was double majoring in ag, and business. And so it was very disappointing for my mom. She had a college degree. She was the first in my lineage to have a college degree. And so she thought that she was hot shit. And she's like, well, you have to get a college degree in order to succeed in life. Which,
It's also been shoved down people's throats for years.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And I understand it. I do, but it's definitely not something that I will ever shove down my children's lives or down their throats.
Yeah.
Because I now know that it's not the end all be all. But I ended up medically withdrawing from the university at the end of what would have been my sophomore year, because after my overdose in January, I had to move back home. And I got clean, really, for real that time. Was off of all substances except nicotine, which is the NA clean way. And I lived that way for about 5 months almost. And then, honestly, I don't really know what happened. I just had a really, really hard night one night, and decided to smoke weed. And that was very rough. I need to backtrack there. I said 5 months. That time was only 3 months. Okay. So following my overdose, I got clean for about 3 months. And during that time, I met my ex-boyfriend, Tommy. He was also in the program, but he was not clean. He was in and out, but went to meetings all the time. And we started dating. And then our close friend and dealer, my previous dealer from high school, and his dealer for quite a few years, we had no idea each other existed. We just happened to have the same guy. And he ended up getting shot by his girlfriend. Complete self-defense on her end. He had been abusing her for years under our noses, and we had no idea. And so for some godforsaken reason, Tommy was appointed the person to take care of the children if anything ever happened. And so for about 3 days, Tommy and I were staying at his, the guy who got shot, we were staying at his girlfriend's mom's house with the 3 children. They were all under 4 years old. And the youngest was about 6 months old. And then Tommy approached me one day and said that he wanted to adopt the 3 kids with me. And that was the biggest shock I have ever had in my life. I was like, bro, I am not ready for kids. At the time, I was nowhere near ready. I had just started smoking weed again. I was having mad issues. Mm-hmm. He was doing Percocets. He was doing cocaine. He was smoking weed. He was drinking. I'm like, neither of us are in a position to adopt these 3 children. These 3 children would be taken away from us immediately.
Right.
And so my solution to get out of that was to try to kill myself once again. And that's definitely been a very common theme throughout my life, is when things get too difficult, I will hurt myself to the point of trying to kill myself. Mm-hmm. And whether that be pills, whether that be self-harming, what have you, I've done it all. And I know each time that I have attempted, I've never truly, truly wanted to die. I just wanted out of the situation I was in. And technically, each time it kind of worked. But this last time, I was sent to the psych ward, and the overdose on the pills that I had taken actually induced a miscarriage. And so that was my 6th pregnancy. I have been pregnant 11 times total. And we'll get into this 11th one in a minute, but I had 4 abortions and then have had 5 miscarriages. 6 miscarriages now, actually, because I just had one this past August. But it wreaked havoc on my mental health. And so when I was in the psych ward, I contacted that ex from the summer before. We ended up getting back together because Tommy ghosted me after I tried to kill myself. And it was a very, very unhealthy situation. I had just gotten out of a very unhealthy work situation and was in this, like, I don't even know what you would call it, like a homoerotic friendship type thing with this other girl who I will also not be naming because she definitely does not want to be put on blast right now. But
Yeah.
there's a lot that I could put her on blast for. But I had, after that, I used for about a year almost. And then that brings us up to this last March. I used cocaine for the last time on March 15th, which is my birthday. And that was the last time that I have touched a hard drug, except for Xanax, which I had touched back in May. Took 1 bar and immediately regretted it, made myself puke, and came home to my ex-boyfriend. We will call him Duncan. That's nowhere near his name.
Okay.
But Duncan and I got together right after my birthday. But prior to that, I had been kind of seeing this man named Daniel, who was 13 years older than me. And he would feed me his Xanax bars because he was prescribed them. And he knew that I had an issue. And so he would encourage that issue because then it would make it easier for me to sleep with him. And he would talk about, I had opened up to him about the Bryce situation because I trusted him at first. And so he would use that to his advantage and start talking about that while we were having sex. And it was the most disgusting, vile thing I have ever experienced, aside from the actual Bryce experience itself.
Right.
And then it's icky.
That's so infuriating. That's so gross.
Yeah, it's very icky. And unbeknownst to me, he was how do I word it? He was an abuser. I mean, plain and simple, he was an abuser.
Yeah.
He was on parole, which, like, probation, I guess. And I knew that going into the relationship this last February. I knew that going into all of it. And then I just completely ignored all the warning signs. He gave me a very solid, what I thought, explanation on why he was on probation, saying that his ex was crazy, she's batshit crazy, whatever. And I believed him until she messaged me. And he put his hands around my throat at the very beginning of March. And I left his apartment, stormed out of his apartment. I hit him upside the head and I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? And I stormed out of the apartment, and then about 2.5 weeks later went back to him because he said he had one of my very memorable items. It was a bong that like meant a lot to me. And so I thought that I needed to go get that. Unbeknownst to me, he had ulterior motives that night. He ended up pulling a gun on me and raped me. And that that was one of my most traumatizing experiences I've ever had. I was damn near sober. I had done a little bit of coke that night. This was the night before my birthday, so the night before I stopped using. And I had done just a little bit of coke that night and was like, yeah, I'm going to call it a night. And then he pulled the gun on me. And so I experienced, that was my first sexual assault experience aside from my childhood, that I remember every single detail of. And that's haunted me for the last 7-8 months. Absolutely haunted me. And so then when Duncan and I got together a few days later, I thought things would be way different, and they were. They really were. He was a pretty decent guy. I ended up miscarrying Daniel's child that April because I once again tried to kill myself. And I got pregnant all these times because I was using so heavily. People are always like, how'd you get pregnant so many times and like never fix it? And I was like, because I was using. I was on birth control. I was just using. And so then Duncan and I were together for about 6 months. About 4 months into the relationship, I had a miscarriage with his child. And that really had set me over the edge in a way. I got very mean after that. I had already been struggling a lot with my temper the last few years. And then this last August, last July, end of July, it got really, really bad. It truly got bad back in middle to end of June when my very close friend committed suicide. But that's not my story to tell.
But the grief can really mess with you. So like the grieving part, yes, you can feel that, and it can change your whole being.
100%. And having lost 3 people over the last 3.5 years, really fucked with my psyche, like completely and totally. I don't trust anyone anymore, like whatsoever. I have numerous friends now that also have mental health issues, one of which just actually got out of the psych ward today because she had tried to kill herself. And so it's very difficult for me to open up to people and fully trust people now. I get that. Because I'm afraid that they're going to kill themselves, because that's been the case with 3 of who I thought were some of my closest people in my lives. And this last one, he was the closest person in my life for 4 years. He was my absolute best friend in the entire world. He was with me through everything. He never faltered. And I loved him with my entire heart. And so it was very difficult. But then this last August, when I had my miscarriage, that one was just like a spontaneous kind of miscarriage. It wasn't caused by drug use. I didn't really try to kill myself like I had in April. And then ended up getting pregnant for the 11th time. About 2 weeks after that miscarriage is when like my dating scan is showing. And so that was September 17th of this year. I found out that I was pregnant for the 11th time. And Duncan and I ended up splitting ways about 3 weeks after that because I had a really bad scare at the very beginning. About 3 days after I found out, I had really bad cramping and bled a little bit, but not to the point of like thinking it was a miscarriage again.
Yeah.
But we went to the emergency room just to be safe. They did an ultrasound on me and saw something in my cervix and just automatically assumed it was the pregnancy, automatically assumed it was a cervical ectopic, and told me to go home and let it pass. And I understand that that's like common procedure, but it was very hard because they didn't give me, they said, take Tylenol, that's all you can do because you can't take ibuprofen because you could bleed out. And so I went to the ER about 4 times over that week and a half, 2 weeks, because I was continuing to have cramping, and it was 10 out of 10 pain most of those times. If not, it was like 9 to 10 out of 10 pain each of those times.
Yeah.
And so I would go in, now that I've been clean off of hard drugs for as long as I have been, I feel comfortable and safe when it's medicated to me. And so I would receive fentanyl or ketamine, and they would just be like, okay, well, you just have to go home and pass it. And it had been a week at that point, and I still had not passed the pregnancy. And so I went to my OBGYN, and they did another ultrasound, and they were like, dude, your levels are still rising. Like, this is the weirdest thing we've ever seen. We've never seen something like this before. And so they did their own ultrasound, and the pregnancy was in the right place. It ended up being a cyst in my cervix. And so it's just like been the most fucked situation.
And things are also really crazy because just in the state of Iowa, how many doctors have left the state due to our stupid abortion bans? So, I mean, that... Yeah. They probably don't have enough, so of course they're not going to really deep dive like they could have, 4 years ago.
Right. They could not have dove in as deep as they did when I had my first abortion,
Right.
That I had all of the resources available to me when I had my first abortion. And then this pregnancy, I had absolutely none. And so now I am 8.5 weeks pregnant. Baby's father and I have split. We are not speaking. I found out that he's a boy, and so I'm very excited. I actually have been holding, where's the camera? I've been holding his little stuffy that my best friend and his godmother had gotten for him that has become my comfort item over the last month.
I've had the same thing with my pregnancies too. You get one thing for your baby and it's like, this is mine until you come. And then it's yours. Yes.
Exactly. And so I honestly, I'm in a much better place today than I have ever been in my entire life. After my dad died, I want to go back and mention this. After my dad died, I had talked about my reasons to stick around notebook earlier. And after he died, I started a Google Doc and a Google submission form and a little whiteboard outside my dorm room door that people could write their reasons that they lived for down. And then I would put them all in a Google Doc. Somehow, some way that account got hacked or it got deleted or something. And I had probably 500 submissions on it.
Oh my gosh.
Over 6 months. And so that was very discouraging. But then after my best friend passed this last June, my ex and I had taken the road trip out to his state, a 17-hour road trip there and an 18-hour road trip back. because we took a different route coming home. I had a really sleepless night that first night. I did not get an ounce of sleep. We stopped driving at 2 a.m. and started driving again at 5 a.m. But within those 3 hours that we were laying in the hotel bed, my ex was sleeping and I was working on a website called Reasons to Stick Around. And so now today I have a website that I had built through Squarespace, thankfully. Didn't have to build it all myself, thank God. That would have been horrible. But I have a submission form on the main page where people can go in and submit their reasons that they've stuck around and why they're alive today. I have a few social media platforms for it. I have TikTok and Instagram for it. And have had, I think at this point, I want to say 500 submissions.
Oh, wow.
Again. And I have 50 of my own reasons on that website that I've stuck around, and then about probably 500 that other people have stuck around. And it's been absolutely incredible. It's been absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
And so it's my passion project and I love it with my entire heart. But yeah, I think that about wraps it up.
Okay, let me just say, if anyone has listened to the podcast from the beginning, which I do encourage you to listen, I originally started the podcast to share my own trauma because I also have been through a lot of stuff. And I will say I have not gone through as many similar things as you, but there's a lot of things that you had mentioned. I was like, yep, I've been through that. Yep. So I can totally get some of the experiences that you had and the way that you were thinking in those ways. Like I get it. I highly encourage people to listen to some of mine in the beginning half to kind of understand, the reason why this podcast started. And I know I'm definitely going to check out your stuff for your project, the Reasons to Stick Around. Exactly. That's how it's like.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So I love that because I definitely love it when people use their trauma or things they have gone through to better themselves and to kind of rise above it. And I feel that I think that's something that's really going to be good for you. I love that for you. And I love, let me know if you need anything else with that too, as I would be happy to help with that.
Yeah.
But yeah, your story, I have no words. You've been through so much and I feel for you. I mean, I bet there's probably other people who've had shared similarities. By doing this podcast, I mean, I guess I have been through some really fucked up shit, but I guess I've been sheltered in some areas because, like, I didn't realize drug use was as heavy in people's lives as it is and how easily and ready available it is until, I'm 32 years old and I do a podcast now and I listen to other people tell me their stories, and it's just drug use is always like a really big pillar in that. And I just kind of am blown away because I don't know if it's because I grew up in like bumfuck nowhere, Iowa, that like no one talks about it. And like you have these circle of friends, but like it feels like that's always like a main pillar in a lot of people's stories. And it just kind of blows my mind being like growing up and feeling like almost like that's not a thing. And then finding out, no, this is the huge thing that a lot of people go through. Yeah. And I'm just like, maybe I was too sheltered.
Well, that's what I thought until I was like 12. I didn't, like, despite all my drug use, I didn't know that marijuana was technically even a thing until I was 16. But yeah, so it's definitely, there's a lot of drug use out there. It's crazy.
And I grew up around a lot of drug use as a kid, and I thought it was just like my life, the circle of people that I was around. And I didn't realize it was like a lot of people kind of thing. And it's kind of like growing up and realizing a lot of these cycles and habits that people have. I was like, oh my gosh, there's so many people that deal with this. It's really mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So, and then a lot in your case with being raped and abused, and and the center of that too being just everything that you've gone through. Like, you've been through so much. It's almost like making me speechless, because I don't even know how to, like, I get why you went through things and why things are so hard. And we've also discussed before we started the podcast that, like, I'm super into astrology, and knowing that you're a Pisces and I'm a Pisces and we feel certain ways about things,
Yeah.
I can totally see if I would have had a different round of people that I was around, I could have very likely went through some of the similar things that you went through.
Yeah.
And it's it's kind of mind-blowing, kind of knowing, like, alter reality, what could have been my life if I would have stuck around certain people in my life.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
For
very
sure.
eye-opening, and I am so happy that you came on and shared your story, because I'm
Yeah.
hoping that other people will come and share their stories and, like, heal from it. I know
Yeah.
with sharing my story, it was such a healing thing. I know how you'd mentioned that you had shared your story about your molestation, your sexual abuse
Mm-hmm.
on TikTok, and how
Mm-hmm.
that was, like, the first time you talked about it. When you shared, did it kind of feel like some sort of relief, kind of left a
100%.
little bit?
A
Yeah.
100%. And even just tonight doing this podcast, I feel like a lot of weight has been lifted off my shoulders, especially talking about the last few months of trauma, because I haven't delved much into that, because I've
Yeah.
not really realized that the last few months have been super traumatic for me too.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been a very healing experience talking about everything.
For sure. I mean, people are always like, you should write a book. Well, I can't. That's not my thing. I like to read books. Don't ask me to write a book, but I will talk
Yeah.
about it. And, like,
Yeah.
I love listening to people. I love stories and people explaining their stuff. So that's another reason I'm so passionate about doing the podcast. Like, yes, I might not contribute a lot to the conversation, but I'm listening, and I am, like, putting things in here and there. So
Right.
I feel that.
100%. 100%.
Yes. Well, again, I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I truly appreciate it. And I definitely would love to have you back on, maybe like a year or so from now, so we can get an update and see how
I would
everything's
love
going
that.
for you. I would love
I
that
would
so
love that.
much.
I'll have a little baby boy by then too, so that's
I
exciting.
know. And then you can
Yeah.
tell us all about your birth and everything like
Yeah.
that.
Yes,
Yes. And
100%. I would be more than happy to do that.
oh, that yes, future plans.
Future plans.
Alrighty. Well, if you would like to come onto the podcast to share your trauma, you can send me an email at sorryfortraumadumpingpodcast@gmail.com. It's really long, but you won't forget it. I also have an Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. And go ahead and like, subscribe, put any comments below, and share this with your friends. Share this with anyone that you think might, resonate from the story, and, or people who just like listening to trauma. There's an audience out there. I'm just still trying to find it. Alrighty, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.